It started with a letter, just a plain white envelope left in my mailbox. Inside was a notice from the HOA claiming that a portion of my own driveway was actually part of a shared community easement. I remember standing there, reading it, twice, thinking it had to be a mistake. I'd lived on this property for over a decade. I'd paved that driveway myself, paid for every foot of it, and even had the original deed and survey showing it was 100% mine. But the HOA had other ideas. They said they were reclaiming the section and planned to widen the entrance for the neighborhood using my land at first. I thought it was some kind of mix-up. So I called their office, thinking a quick conversation would clear things up. But what I got instead was a smug voice telling me, "You're free to contest it if you'd like, though it probably won't go in your favor." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a paperwork error. They were trying to bully me into giving up a piece of my property for their convenience. I wasn't having it. What they didn't know is that I had a legal easement they depended on to access the main road. And if they were going to come after my driveway, I was ready to turn the tables. That one letter kicked off a chain of events that ended with an entire neighborhood blocked off. And it was all legal. So here's the backstory. My house sits on a large plot of land at the edge of a gated community. It was built years before the HOA even existed. When the developers came in and built the neighborhood behind me, they asked for a legal easement across a narrow strip of my land so they could connect the new homes to the main road. I agreed, under strict conditions. That easement was never meant to give them rights over my actual driveway. It was just a small, marked section near the edge of my property that allowed them to pass through. Nothing more, but over time, as new HOA board members cycled in, they started treating that strip like it belonged to them. At first, it was minor things. Landscaping too close to my fence, a few signs put up without asking. I let it slide. But now, this move with my driveway, that crossed the line. I pulled out my old legal paperwork, including the easement agreement. Every line confirmed that they had access only for passage, not ownership, not expansion, and definitely not the right to take part of my paved driveway. I tried to reason with them again, calmly laying out the facts, but they kept pushing back, saying the community's needs have changed and that they were reinterpreting the easement. That's when I realized they didn't care about the legal side. They just assumed I'd give in, but they had no clue what I was preparing behind the scenes. As things escalated, the HOA started getting bolder. One morning, I walked outside to find a crew of workers marking the edge of my driveway with orange flags and spray paint. I didn't get a notice, a call, nothing. Just strangers stepping onto my property like they owned the place. When I confronted the foreman, he handed me a work order that said, "Authorized by HOA board." That's when I knew they weren't just testing boundaries anymore. They were planning to take action. Word started spreading through the neighborhood, and I noticed some residents looking at me differently, like I was the one causing problems. One neighbor even asked why I didn't just let it go so they could get an extra lane in and improve traffic. That's when I realized the board was spinning their own version of the story. They were telling people I was being difficult, even selfish, holding up a necessary community improvement. But they weren't telling anyone the truth, that this was my private property and they were the ones crossing the line. Meanwhile, I kept gathering everything I needed, copies of the easement, surveys, even drone photos showing the original access route. I spoke to a property attorney who was just as stunned as I was by how far the HOA was pushing. Legally, they didn't have a leg to stand on, but they were counting on pressure, confusion, and neighbors turning against me to win by default. They had no idea what was coming next. The final straw came when I caught a board member walking the edge of my property with a clipboard and a tape measure. No knock, no permission, just trespassing like it was part of his daily routine. I stayed calm, but I filmed the whole thing. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Just verifying boundaries for the community improvements." I replied, That's funny, because you're standing 10 feet onto my land. He got flustered and left, but I knew then that they were gearing up for something bigger, maybe even trying to claim the land through usage or documentation. That's when I decided it was time to act. My lawyer drafted a formal cease and desist, and I had it delivered to the HOA board with all the supporting documents: deed records, the original survey, and the easement agreement. At the same time, I began preparing for a quiet but bold move. You see, their only access to the neighborhood ran through that same narrow strip of land I had allowed them to use, and the easement terms were clear. If they breached the agreement, I had the right to revoke access, but instead of backing down, the HOA doubled down. They sent another letter claiming that I was interfering with community development and threatening legal action. The tension was sky high. I could feel the pressure building from both sides: the board, the neighbors, even social media whispers. What they didn't realize was I already had permits in hand, and a plan they didn't see coming. Just when I thought I had them cornered, a twist came out of nowhere. My attorney called me in a panic after reviewing a new document filed with the county office. Apparently, the HOA had submitted a request to rezone the easement area, claiming it was part of the public right-of-way. If approved, that would strip my ownership rights and potentially give them control over not just the strip of land, but a portion of my actual driveway. I was stunned. This wasn't just overreach anymore. This was a strategic land grab using technical loopholes. I rushed down to the zoning office and demanded to see the filing. Sure enough, they'd attached photos that conveniently cut out all the markers showing the easement boundaries. Their narrative made it seem like I was blocking a public road, not defending private property. The staff admitted they'd received several community complaints, mostly from HOA board members. They were planning a hearing in 2 weeks. That's when I realized this wasn't just a property dispute. It was a coordinated move to rewrite the facts and take control of my land piece by piece. And if they succeeded, it wouldn't just affect me. This could set a dangerous precedent for any property owner near an HOA border. I knew I had to move fast. The permits I pulled earlier were suddenly more valuable than I realized. If the board wanted to play legal chess, they were about to find out I'd already placed them in check, just not the way they expected. The day of the zoning hearing came, and I showed up early with every document I had, including drone footage of the easement, my property survey, signed permits, and even footage of the HOA board members trespassing. What really flipped the room, though, was a signed letter from the original developer stating that the land in question was never intended for public use, and that any such claim was a complete misrepresentation of the original plat when I laid it all out for the county officials, calm, measured, and backed by solid evidence. The tone in the room shifted. You could see the zoning board exchanging glances. The HOA's case quickly started to unravel, especially once I played the video where a board member literally said, "We'll get control of that land one way or another." That didn't sit well with the county. The rezoning request was unanimously denied, but that isn't the end. Just days after the hearing, I received a letter from a neighbor, someone who had been quiet throughout the entire ordeal. He revealed that the HOA had been secretly funneling dues into a legal fund for this exact land dispute without properly disclosing it to homeowners. Turns out, I wasn't the only one they'd been targeting. That opened the door to a class action lawsuit that completely blindsided the board in one swift motion. I not only protected my driveway, but exposed a deeper pattern of abuse. And the neighborhood? It would never look at the HOA the same way again. After the class action suit was filed, it didn't take long for more neighbors to come forward with similar stories. Unexplained fines, threats, shady violations that seemed made up on the spot. The HOA board, once so bold and untouchable, suddenly found themselves scrambling. Under pressure from homeowners and legal demands, 3 board members resigned within a week. Eventually, the entire HOA was restructured, and the community voted to place stricter limits on what the board could enforce, especially around private property boundaries. As for my driveway, it stayed right where it was, completely mine as it always had been. I installed a small, tasteful privacy gate at the entrance, not to block anyone out, but just to send a quiet message. Respect matters. And believe it or not, that same neighbor who first tipped me off. We've since become good friends, often swapping stories about our HOA battle days over coffee. The biggest lesson from all this: know your rights and document everything. Just because someone speaks with authority doesn't mean they're acting lawfully. If I'd let intimidation or confusing legal talk stop me, I'd probably have lost more than just part of my driveway. So, to anyone dealing with a power-hungry HOA or facing unfair treatment, don't back down. Learn the rules better than they do. Stand your ground with facts, not noise. In the end, the truth holds more weight than any board.